Welcome back to Whispers in the Dark. This is a tale of love, disbelief, stone, blood, and the terrible hour when old sins rise from their slabs and walk again. I tell it because I must. I tell it because silence has done nothing for me. It has not softened the memory, nor dulled the sight that waits for me whenever I shut my eyes. It has not restored my wife. It has not emptied my ears of the sound of marble scraping across stone. It has not taken from my hand the imagined chill of that little broken finger, white as bone, heavy as guilt, clenched in Laura's dying grasp. You may think this a fancy. You may say that grief distorts the mind, and that terror gives shape to shadows. Say it, if you like. I said worse. I laughed at warnings. I mocked the fears of age and country superstition. I believed myself reasonable, modern, superior to village whispers and churchyard tales. And because I believed myself clever, my wife died. My name is Jack. And when I married Laura, I thought the world had opened at last into light. We had little money, though in those days I counted poverty romantic. I was an artist then, or believed myself one, with fingers stained by paint and a head full of beautiful failures. Laura, who deserved silk rooms and lamps of rose-colored glass, and a garden full of June roses, followed me instead to a lonely cottage on the outskirts of Brenzett, with a roof that bowed like an old servant and windows that looked over rough grass toward the church. She said she loved it. God forgive me, I believed her. The cottage stood a little apart from the village, past the last warm window and the last familiar gate. It was reached by a narrow lane where the hedges leaned close, so close that in wet, whether their black branches scratched the sides of a passing cart like fingernails. Behind the cottage, a field dipped toward marshy ground where reeds hissed even when there was no wind. In front, beyond a ragged strip of garden and a leaning wooden gate, rose the tower of the church. It was not a grand church. It was old, gray, blunt, and watchful. Its stones seemed to hold the damp in all seasons. Even on sunny mornings, when the grass glittered and the birds scattered over the yews, the church had a coldness about it, as though no warmth could settle there for long. Its walls were patched from different ages. Its windows were narrow and deep-set. The tower had a cracked clock that sounded across the fields with a hollow, iron patience. Inside that church lay the marble men. There were 2 of them, full-sized, stretched upon stone slabs in an old side chapel. Knights, people called them, men of war, men of violence. They lay in armor from throat to foot, their hands folded as if in prayer, their faces turned upward with the blind serenity of the dead. But there was nothing serene in them. Even carved in white marble, even worn by time, their faces had cruelty in them. The mouths were thin, the noses sharp. The eye sockets, though only sculpted hollows, looked too deep. The sculptor who made them had either known their souls or hated them. One had a beard carved in stiff curls that clung to his jaw like frozen foam. The other was clean-shaven, with a long face and high cheekbones, a face that might once have been handsome if it had not seemed so entirely without mercy. Their armor was cut so finely that one could see the plates overlapping, the straps, the buckles, the ridges of the gauntlets. Even the fingers had been shaped with patient care. It was those fingers that troubled me later. So delicately made, so human in their curve, and yet so cold. The villagers said the knights had been wicked men, marauders by land and sea, lords who had taken what they wished, burned what resisted them, and laughed at prayers. Their old house, so Mrs. Dorman told us, had once stood where our cottage stood now. I took this for the usual village embroidery. Wherever there is a ruin, there must be a tyrant. Wherever there is a church slab, there must be a curse. So I smiled and made little sketches of the marble knights in my notebook. Laura did not smile. She was sensitive to places in a way I never understood until it was too late. She could enter a room and know at once if sorrow had lived there. She would grow quiet in certain lanes, or turn suddenly from a window, pale and unable to explain herself. She was not foolish. No one who knew her could think that. Laura had a mind as clear as running water, and a sweetness in her nature that did not make her weak, only more aware of wounds than the rest of us. Her beauty was not the loud kind that demands notice. It stole upon you. In lamplight, her hair seemed almost gold, though by day it was softer, more brown than yellow, and her skin had that faint translucence which made me always fear she was colder than she admitted. Her eyes were gray or blue or violet, depending on the weather and her mood. When she laughed, I felt rich. When she laid her hand on my sleeve, I felt chosen. She had one habit which I loved and later came to dread. She would pause in the middle of some household task or while reading by the fire and lift her head as if hearing something too far away for me. Then she would listen, not with fear at first, but with deep attention. Once, when I asked what it was, she answered, "Only the house remembering." I kissed her forehead and told her houses had no memory. The first months were happy. They were so happy that to recall them now is almost unbearable. We painted the little parlor ourselves, though the damp bloomed through the paper in pale gray stains. We planted herbs by the kitchen door. Laura made curtains from old muslin and laughed when they hung unevenly. I worked by the north window because the light there was steady and cold. She would sit near me with sewing in her lap, or write letters, or read aloud. In the evenings, the village seemed to vanish altogether, and the cottage became the whole world, firelit and dear, with the wind moving through the hedges, and the clock of the church sounding each hour like a distant warning. Neither of us understood. Mrs. Dorman came to us 3 days a week at first, then more often. She was a stout, square-shouldered woman with red hands, iron gray hair, and eyes that saw everything. Her face had the weathered look of someone who had spent a lifetime bargaining with earth, illness, stubborn animals, and stubborn men, and had lost patience with them all. She cooked, scrubbed, mended, scolded, and loved Laura with the rough protectiveness of a woman who had known too much pain to speak gently of it. She never liked me. I know that now. At the time I thought her merely sour. She answered me with respect, but there was always judgment folded beneath it. If I forgot to bring in coal, she noticed. If I laughed at some village saying, she noticed. If Laura grew tired and I did not see it quickly enough, Mrs. Dorman's eyes would harden until they looked almost like the church stones themselves. Dr. Kelly lived not far away, though nearer the village than we did. He was Irish, warm-hearted, loud-voiced, and given to carrying science and superstition in the same pocket without admitting that either touched the other. He spoke of fevers and humors with professional firmness, then crossed himself when an owl cried at noon. He and I became friends of a sort, though he often mocked my profession and said painters were men who starved voluntarily and expected praise for it. He liked Laura. Everyone did. He called her little lady in a tone that should have annoyed me, but never did, for she smiled when he said it. Autumn came early that year. The leaves along the lane blackened before they reddened, spoiled by rain and salt wind. The fields grew dull. The sky lowered. The church tower seemed nearer every week, as though the wet air had shortened the distance between us. At dusk, the yews in the churchyard stood massed together like mourners who had forgotten the burial, but remained out of habit. Rooks gathered in them, dropping their harsh cries into the evening. Sometimes, from our parlor window, I could see the pale wall of the side chapel through the branches. I knew the marble men lay inside, on their backs, waiting in their old carved patience. It was toward the end of October that Mrs. Dorman gave notice. I had been to Dr. Kelly that afternoon. Rain had come down without pause, fine and needling, the kind that seems not to fall from the sky, but to be breathed by the earth itself. Kelly had kept me longer than I intended with tobacco and argument. We spoke of medicine, art, politics, ghosts, and the idiocy of believing in them. I remember this because I was particularly eloquent against superstition that day. I declared that fear was mostly inherited ignorance, that the supernatural was an empty cupboard where frightened minds stored their old rags, and that the world would improve when educated people stopped treating every draft and shadow as evidence of eternity. Kelly laughed until he coughed. Say that after midnight in a churchyard, he told me. I would say it anywhere, I answered. And I did. When I returned to the cottage, I found Laura in tears. She was in the parlor, the room already dim though the hour was not late. The fire had fallen low, and a seam of smoke crawled along the chimney breast before disappearing upward. Laura sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes bright and wet. Mrs. Dorman stood near the door, her apron twisted in both hands. There was flour on one sleeve and a look on her face I did not understand. "What is this?" I asked. Laura tried to rise, but I went to her. Her hand was cold. "Mrs. Dorman is leaving us," she said. There was such distress in her voice that I felt immediate irritation. Not at Laura, never at Laura, but at the old woman for causing it. "Leaving?" I said. "Why?" Mrs. Dorman looked at the floor. "At the end of the month, sir." "The end of the month is tomorrow." "Yes, sir. And this is the first we hear of it." "I am sorry for it, ma'am," she said to Laura, not to me. more sorry than I can say, but I cannot bide here tomorrow night. I cannot. Laura trembled. I felt it through her fingers. What nonsense is this? I asked. Are you ill? Is there some family trouble? Mrs. Dorman said nothing. I asked again, more sharply. At last she looked up, and there was fear in her face. Not embarrassment, not obstinacy, not the ordinary worry of an old servant afraid of offending her employers. Fear. It had made her look smaller, almost childlike. Her lips moved once before sound came. It is All Saints' Eve tomorrow. And what of it? She glanced toward the window. Rain tapped there with tiny cold fingers. Beyond the glass, the church tower was already half lost in mist. You should be away from here tomorrow night, she said. Both of you. Laura gripped my hand. Why? I demanded. Mrs. Dorman swallowed. Because they walk. For a moment, no one spoke. The fire settled with a soft collapse. Somewhere in the wall, a mouse scratched. I remember thinking how absurd the words sounded, and how strangely the room received them, as if the cottage had been waiting for them all along. Who walks? I asked. Mrs. Dorman's mouth tightened. The marble ones. I laughed then. I cannot forgive myself for laughing. Laura did not laugh. She had gone very pale. Mrs. Dorman stepped forward. Do not make light of it, sir, I beg you. There are things older than our talk and stronger than our unbelief. Those two in the church were wicked men when breath was in them, and wicked men they remain. Their house stood here, where this cottage stands. Every All Saints' Eve, when the clock strikes 11, they get down from their stones and come back. To inspect the property, I said. Jack, Laura whispered. Mrs. Dorman ignored my tone. They come to the old place. They come in their stone armor with their stone hands. My mother knew it. Her mother knew it. Every child in Brenzett knows it, though most will not speak of it after dark. I should have stopped her then for Laura's sake, or else listened fully. Instead, I stood between both duties and failed them. What are we meant to do? I asked lightly. Offer them tea. Mrs. Dorman's eyes flashed. You are meant to lock your doors before the hour. You are meant to bar the windows. You are meant to make the sign of the cross over the doorstep and on the panes. And you are meant not to open, not for any sound, not for any cry, not if your own dead mother calls your name from outside. At this, Laura made a small sound, almost a sob. That is enough, I said. But Mrs. Dorman, having begun, seemed unable to stop. I have seen the slabs empty, she said. Not with these eyes, no, and may God spare me. But my uncle did, when he was a fool of a lad and thought himself brave. Went into the church with 2 others after the hour. One came back without his speech for 3 days. One took fever and died before Christmas. My uncle lived to old age, but never again would he pass that church after sundown. He said the hollows in the slabs were wet, as if the stone had sweated itself loose. He said there were crumbs of marble on the floor, like white teeth. Enough, I repeated. Mrs. Dorman lowered her head, but her voice continued, quieter. I will leave food prepared. I will come back after sunrise, but I cannot be in this house tomorrow night." Laura rose unsteadily and went to her. "Please do not leave me," she said. There it was, not us, me. Mrs. Dorman took Laura's hands in hers. The old woman's face broke with pity. "My lamb," she said, "come with me. Come to my sister. Let him laugh if he must, but you come away." That stung me. "This is absurd," I said. "Laura is not going to be dragged from her own home by a village ghost story." Mrs. Dorman looked at me then, and all the fear in her changed to anger. "Her own home," she said. "Then keep it safe for her." She left the room without another word. That evening, I tried to comfort Laura. I told her Mrs. Dorman was old, ignorant, full of tales. I reminded her how happy we had been. I said the story was plainly foolish. Stone men did not rise and walk. Marble fingers did not unlatch doors. Dead knights did not leave churches to visit cottages simply because villagers had passed the tale from mouth to mouth until fear polished it smooth. Laura listened, but she did not answer at first. At length she said, "I have not liked the church since we came. You never told me. I did not want you to think me silly. I could never think that." She looked at me then with such sad tenderness that I felt ashamed, though not enough. "I dream of them," she said. "The nights." Yes, the word was barely breath. "What do you dream?" She folded her arms around herself. "I dream I am alone in the parlor and the fire is very low. I know you are outside, but I cannot move to call you. Something is coming along the lane, not walking as men walk, heavily, slowly, as though every step must be forced out of the earth. I hear metal, but it is not metal. I hear stone touching stone." The room seemed colder. And then they reach the door. They, both, but one is worse than the other. "Which one?" "The clean-shaven one. The one with the long face. He has no eyes in the dream, only wet black places in the marble. He stands outside the window and bends down to look in." I tried to laugh, but could not quite manage it. "Dreams borrow from waking things," I said. "You saw the statues. Your mind used them." "Yes," she said, "perhaps. You must not let Mrs. Dorman frighten you. She was frightened too, because she believes the tale." Laura looked at the fire. The flames were red and low, making the coal gleam like wounds. "Jack," she said after a while, "will you promise me something?" "Anything. Tomorrow night, do not leave me alone." I kissed her hand. "I promise. I meant it when I said it. That is another torment. I meant it, and still I failed." The next day passed strangely. All Saints' Eve dawned with a yellowish mist pressed low over the fields. The grass was soaked. The trees seemed to drip though no rain fell. Mrs. Dorman came early, worked fiercely, and would not be drawn into conversation. She baked bread, boiled a joint, laid kindling, filled the coal scuttle, checked the shutters, and muttered prayers when she thought we could not hear. Once I found her at the front door, her thumb moving over the wood of the lintel. When she saw me, she snatched her hand away. "What are you doing?" "Nothing, sir. Were you making your sign?" She stared at me. Better a sign on wood than a grief on the soul. I let her go. At noon, she took Laura aside. I do not know what passed between them, but when Laura returned, her eyes were red. Mrs. Dorman left before twilight. At the gate, she turned back and called to me. "Before 11, sir. Lock and mark. You need not believe, only do it." "I shall lock the door," I said. "And the windows?" "Yes." "And the cross sign?" I did not answer. Her face twisted. "Pride is poor company for the dead," she said. Then she went down the lane, her dark shawl soon swallowed by mist. Laura watched from the doorway until the last sound of Mrs. Dorman's steps had faded. Inside, the cottage felt too quiet. The day seemed to hold its breath. I tried to work, but my hand spoiled every line. Laura moved from room to room, touching ordinary things as if taking leave of them. The blue cup on the dresser, the small brass candlestick near the bed, the little framed print above the mantel. Once she stood by the parlor window and stared toward the church so long that I went to draw the curtain. "No," she said, "not yet." The church was visible through the dimming air. Its tower rose from the mist, and below it the yews were black and motionless. No rooks called. No smoke rose from the village beyond. The world seemed empty but for us, the church, and whatever lay waiting inside it. At dinner, Laura barely ate. I drank more than usual and spoke more loudly. I told stories of London friends, of exhibitions, of foolish patrons, of the time Kelly had mistaken turpentine for medicine and nearly poisoned his own dog. Laura smiled when she could, but her gaze kept wandering to the clock. At 9, I locked the front door. At 9:30, I checked the kitchen door. At 10, I fastened the shutters. Laura sat by the fire in her white gown, her hair loose over her shoulders. She looked very young, too young to be married to a fool who thought courage meant disbelief. "Will you make the signs?" she asked. I was standing near the window, with the candle in my hand. For one breath, only one, I almost did. What harm would it have done? A motion of the hand, a little yielding, a mercy for the woman I loved. But I saw in my mind Mrs. Dorman's stern face, Kelly's laughter, my own grand speeches against superstition. And so, with the cruelty of vanity, I smiled. "My darling, if I make the signs, I give fear a victory. If you do not," she said, "you give it room." I went to her and knelt beside her chair. "Nothing will happen. Then make them for my comfort." I kissed her fingers. "You are tired. This has preyed on you. By morning we shall laugh at it." She withdrew her hand, not angrily, but as if too weary to hold mine. "I shall never laugh at this house," she said. At 11:15, the wind rose. It came suddenly, pressing against the cottage in one long breath. The chimney moaned. The candle flame bent sideways. Somewhere outside, a loose branch scraped the wall once, twice again. Laura started at each sound. I told myself I must be calm for her. I told myself the atmosphere had infected us both. But the truth is this: I began to feel watched. Not by Laura, not by any living person. Watched by the dark glass of the windows, by the closed doors, by the ceiling beams, by the narrow spaces between furniture and wall. Watched by the church, though its windows could not see. Watched by stone eyes that had been blind for centuries. Then from the tower came the first stroke of 11. It rang over the fields, deep and hollow. Laura stood. The second stroke followed. "Jack," she said. The third. I went to her. "I am here." The fourth. The sound seemed to enter the room physically. Each stroke a black weight dropped into the air. The fifth. The fire sank. The sixth. Laura gripped my arm. The seventh. From outside came a sound. Not loud, not near. A faint grinding, as if something heavy shifted after long rest. The eighth stroke drowned it. I felt Laura's fingers tight. The ninth. There it was again. A scrape, a pause, another scrape. The 10th. My own heart was beating so violently. I could hear blood in my ears. The 11th. Silence. The clock ceased, and the silence after it was worse than the sound. It spread across the room, across the cottage, across the fields, thick as burial earth. Laura whispered, "They have got down." No, but my voice sounded thin. She looked at me, and what I saw in her face shames me even now. She was not merely frightened. She was pleading with me to believe her before belief became useless. Then something tapped the window. Once, a small sound, hard, deliberate. Laura cried out and clung to me. "It is a branch," I said. The tapping came again. Once, twice. Not where the branch scratched. Not at the side wall. At the parlor window. Low down near the latch. I took the candle and went to the glass. Laura whispered, "Do not." I raised the light. For an instant, I saw only my own reflection, pale and stretched, with Laura behind me like a ghost already. Then, beyond the glass, something white moved in the dark. I stepped back. It may have been mist. It may have been the pale trunk of a wet tree glimpsed through moving air. It may have been nothing at all. I told myself these things so quickly and fiercely that the telling became another kind of panic. "I am going outside," I said. Laura stared at me. "You promised." "I will only look. I will prove it is nothing." "No, it is better than sitting here imagining horrors." "No, Jack, please." She caught my sleeve. Her hand shook. I remember the feel of each finger through the cloth. Had I stayed, she might have lived. Had I sat beside her with a poker in my hand until dawn, had I marked the door, had I believed for 1 hour what wiser fear had tried to teach me, Laura might have lived. This is the point to which my mind returns always. Not to the church, not to the body, to that small hand on my sleeve asking me not to leave. I removed it gently. "Lock the door behind me," I said. I shall go no farther than the path. Her face changed. Something in her seemed to sink out of reach. Do not be long, she said. I opened the door. Cold came in like water. I stepped outside with my coat unfastened and my pipe in my pocket, though I had forgotten why I carried it. Laura closed the door behind me. I heard the lock turn. That sound should have comforted me. Instead, it seemed final. The mist had thickened. It hung low over the ground, white in places, gray in others, crawling among the dead weeds of the garden. The moon was hidden, but the air had a faint luminosity, as if the sky itself were bruised. The church was a darker shape inside the dark. Its tower rose bluntly. The clock face was invisible. I stood on the path and listened. At first, there was nothing but wind. Then, from the direction of the church, came a sound like stone dragged over stone. My mouth went dry. I looked back through the parlor window. The curtains were not fully drawn. I could see Laura inside, seated in her chair by the fire, her head turned toward the door. The sight of her there, alive and warm, gave me a little courage, though not enough wisdom. I moved toward the gate. The sound came again. Scrape. Silence. Scrape. It was not a footstep, as we know footsteps. No heel, no soul, no rhythm of living balance. It was the weight of something never meant to walk, forcing itself forward by hatred alone. I told myself it came from the woods. Poachers, perhaps. A cart in the lane. A loose stone in the churchyard wall. Any explanation, however thin, seemed preferable to the one that had begun to crawl up from the base of my spine. I went through the gate. The lane to the church was narrow and sunken, with hedges rising on both sides. In daylight, it was merely rustic. That night, it was a throat. The mist lay in it, and I walked into it like a swallowed thing. Thorns caught my sleeves. Wet leaves slapped against my hands. Twice I stopped, certain I had heard movement ahead. Twice there was nothing. Then the wind shifted, and I heard the church door. It groaned. No sound in my life had been so lonely. It was the cry of old hinges moving in darkness, a sound that told of something opened which should have remained shut. I reached the churchyard gate. It stood ajar. I had been there in daylight many times. I knew the path between the graves, the leaning stones, the squat yews, the patch of nettles near the porch. Yet that night each object had become strange. The gravestones seemed to have edged closer together. The yews seemed to stoop. The earth gave underfoot with a wet, soft sound. Names on stones glimmered briefly and vanished. I remember one angel with a broken face, its wings blackened by lichen, its hands lifted as if in warning rather than prayer. The church door was open. Inside, darkness waited. I had no lantern, only matches. My fingers were clumsy with cold as I struck one. The flame burst bright, then trembled. The smell of sulfur filled my nose. I stepped into the church. The match showed a strip of aisle, the backs of pews, the white blur of a pillar. Shadows leapt and folded. The roof disappeared above me. The air smelled of damp stone, dust, old wood, and something else. Something like a cellar opened after many years. There was a coldness inside that felt inhabited. The match burned my fingers. I dropped it. Darkness came down. I struck another. I moved toward the side chapel. My shoes sounded too loud on the floor. Each step returned to me from the walls, altered, delayed, as though something else stepped just after I did. The little flame made the carved faces of memorial tablets twitch and grimace. A brass plaque flashed like an eye. The pulpit loomed and vanished. At the entrance to the chapel, I stopped. I knew before I raised the match. The slabs were empty. There are sights the mind refuses, not by denying them, but by becoming still around them. I did not scream. I did not run at once. I stood with the match burning down between my fingers and looked at the two long stone beds where the marble knights had lain. They were bare, not merely shadowed, bare. The hollows where their bodies had rested were visible in dust. Around the edges lay flakes and grains of white marble. On one slab a dark wetness gleamed, though no rain could have reached it. At the foot of the nearer tomb, a fragment of carved spur lay broken, sharp as a tooth. The match went out. In the dark, something touched the floor behind me. I fled. I do not remember crossing the church. I remember striking my shoulder against a pew hard enough to bruise it. I remember the open door rushing toward me as a gray rectangle. I remember falling among the graves and tearing my palm on a stone. I remember the taste of mud. I remember rising and seeing beyond the churchyard wall, toward the lane and the cottage, two pale shapes moving through the mist. They were far off. They were slow. They were going home. I tried to shout Laura's name, but my throat closed. I ran. The lane fought me. Branches lashed my face. Mud sucked at my shoes. My breath tore in and out like cloth ripping. Through gaps in the hedge, I glimpsed the cottage window, its glow blurred by mist. Once, horribly, something pale crossed in front of it, blocking the light. Then a hand seized my arm. I struck out blindly. "Jack, you lunatic." It was Dr. Kelly. He had a lantern in his hand and a heavy cloak about him. His face, round and ruddy by day, looked sharp in the lantern light. "What in God's name are you doing?" he demanded. "The church," I gasped. "The slabs, they are empty. They are going to the cottage." He stared at me, then at the lane behind me. "You have been drinking." "No." "Dreaming then." "I saw them." "You saw mist and frightened yourself into fits." "Laura is alone." That sobered him. He tightened his grip. "Then we go to her." "No, the church first. You must see." Even now, I do not know why I said it. Some last desperate need for witness, perhaps. Some insane hope that if another man saw the empty slabs, the world might become orderly again. Kelly hesitated, then swore. "1 minute," he said, "then your wife." We went back. The churchyard seemed less terrible with his lantern, casting a yellow pool before us, and his solid body beside mine. He muttered as we crossed the graves, half curses, half prayers. The church door still stood open. Inside, the lantern light spread over pews and pillars, making them merely old, merely damp, merely real. We entered the side chapel together. The marble knights lay on their slabs. I made a sound I had never made before. There they were, both of them, stretched as before, hands folded, faces upward, armor pale and cold. Dust lay undisturbed around them. The slabs were not empty. The fragments I had seen were gone, or hidden, or never there. The wet gleam had vanished. Kelly held the lantern close to my face. "You are white as a corpse," he said. "I saw them gone. You saw shadows. I did not." He turned the lantern toward the statues. "Look," he said more gently. "They have not moved in centuries." But as he spoke, he leaned nearer to the clean-shaven knight. "What is it?" I asked. "One of the fingers is broken." The lantern light fell on the knight's right hand. The fingers were folded over the left in prayer, or had been. The smallest finger of the right gauntlet was missing at the first joint. The break was fresh. Fresh marble is not the color of old weathered stone. It has a raw whiteness, almost moist, like bone newly snapped. Kelly was silent. "You see," I whispered. He straightened too quickly. "Old damage." "No, old damage newly noticed. Come." But his face had changed. We left the church at a run. As we neared the cottage, I saw the front door open. Not wide, only enough that the darkness inside showed between door and frame. I remember Kelly saying, "Merciful God." Arden Gate hung crooked. One hinge had split the wood. The path stones were smeared with mud and something white, a powdery trail that gleamed when the lantern passed over it. At the threshold, the lock had not been forced. The wood around it was crushed inward, as if enormous fingers had pressed and pressed until the bolt tore free. On the door itself, where Mrs. Dorman had begged me to make the sign, 5 pale marks showed in the grain. Not scratches, impressions, broad at the knuckles, narrow at the tips. A hand, a marble hand. "Laura," I cried. No answer. The parlor door stood open too. Inside, the fire burned low. One chair had overturned. The little table was broken, its legs splayed like those of an animal. The rug was dragged half across the floor. A vase lay shattered near the hearth, and the water from it had mingled with ash, making gray paste. The curtains had been torn down. One hung from the rod in strips, moving softly in the draft. Laura was by the window. For a moment, I thought she knelt there, praying. Then I saw the angle of her body. She lay on her side, one arm twisted beneath her, the other stretched toward the glass. Her hair covered part of her face. Her white gown was marked with soot, mud, and gray dust. There were bruises already darkening on her throat, not like the marks of rope, not like fingers of flesh. They were broad, blunt, terrible. On one shoulder the cloth had been torn, and beneath it the skin was scraped raw as though against rough stone. Her lips were parted. Her eyes were open. I went to her. Kelly tried to stop me. I threw him off and fell beside her. Laura. Her skin was cold, but not with the ordinary cold of death. It was stone cold, church cold, a cold that seemed to have entered her from something that had no blood to warm it. Laura. I lifted her. Her head fell against me with unbearable trust. I saw then that her left hand was clenched so tightly that the knuckles were bloodless. Kelly knelt beside us, whispering her name, then mine, then something in Latin that broke apart in his mouth. Help her, I said. He did not answer. Help her. He touched her throat, her wrist, then closed his eyes. No, I do not remember what sound I made. I remember rocking with her in my arms. I remember my cheek against her hair. I remember that she smelled faintly of lavender, smoke, and damp stone. Then Kelly took her clenched hand. It would not open. Her fingers had locked around something. Kelly worked gently at first, then with more force. I shouted at him to stop hurting her, though she was beyond hurt. He said my name again and again. At last her hand opened. A small white object fell onto the floor. It struck the boards with a heavy little click. A marble finger, the broken finger of the clean-shaven knight. There was blood beneath Laura's nails. Not much, thin lines of it. She had clawed at stone. She had fought him. My gentle Laura, who apologized when she broke a cup, had fought a dead knight with her bare hands and torn from him proof of his coming. Kelly crossed himself. I looked toward the window. On the outside of the glass, where the mist had beaded and run, there was the smear of a face. Not a full print, not clear enough to show features as a living face might. Only the suggestion of a brow, a long cheek, a hollow where an eye had been. Beneath it were marks where fingers had slid down the pane. White powder clung to the wet glass. The room seemed to turn. I woke near dawn. They told me later that Kelly had stayed with me until Mrs. Dorman came, and that the old woman, seeing the door broken and the doctor's face, had begun to wail before she entered the cottage. They told me I would not release Laura. They told me I had to be forced away. I remember none of it clearly. I remember only Mrs. Dorman standing in the doorway, both hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes fixed not on Laura, but on me. I told you, she said, not loudly, not cruelly. That was worse. It was the voice of a woman whose warning had returned as a corpse. Afterward came men, questions, explanations. There are always explanations when the living wish not to believe the dead have acted. They said thieves had come, but nothing was stolen. They said Laura had been frightened, had fallen, had struck herself, but no fall made those marks. They said some madman had broken in, but what madman leaves marble dust in the shape of footsteps from the garden gate to the parlor, and from the parlor back again? They said I had imagined the empty slabs, but the finger remained. For a little while the finger was in Kelly's possession. He wrapped it in cloth and locked it in his desk. By morning of the second day, it was gone. The drawer remained locked. No servant had entered. No window was open. Kelly said little after that. He aged in a week. When I pressed him, he told me only this: the hand is whole again. I went to the church. I should not have, but I did. The clean-shaven knight lay in his old posture, hands folded, face lifted to heaven in marble hypocrisy. The smallest finger of his right hand had been restored. Yet if one looked closely, very closely, one could see a fine line around the joint, white upon white, like a scar in stone. I stood over him for a long time. There was something on his mouth, not a smile. Marble cannot smile unless carved so. But the shadow at the corner seemed deeper than before, as if some secret satisfaction had settled there. His eyeless lids stared upward. His armor shone faintly in the chapel gloom, and on the edge of one gauntlet, caught in the carved joint, was a single strand of Laura's hair. I reached to take it. The church clock struck 11 in the morning. Only 11 in the morning, with pale sun at the windows and birds beyond the walls. Yet, at the first stroke, my courage failed. I backed away, stumbled over the chapel step, and fled like a child. Laura was buried 3 days later. The village came. They stood in black clusters under umbrellas, while rain fell softly and steadily, as though the sky were determined to wash the world clean and failing. Mrs. Dorman wept openly. Kelly stood bareheaded until his hair was soaked. I stood beside the grave and looked at the coffin and felt nothing because feeling would have killed me. The church received her. That was the last insult. The same church that housed them took her too. I wanted to tear up the earth with my hands. I wanted to drag the marble men from their slabs and break them into dust. But men watched me, and grief had made my body weak. So I stood while the words were spoken, and the rain darkened the boards of the coffin, and soil struck the lid in soft, final blows. That night, I returned to the cottage alone. No one wished me to. Mrs. Dorman begged me not. Kelly offered me his spare room, but some punishment in me required it. I had left Laura alone there. Now I would be alone in it. The cottage smelled of damp smoke and something scrubbed, but not removed. Mrs. Dorman had cleaned the parlor. The broken table was gone. The rug had been beaten. The curtains had been taken down. Yet the room knew. It knew what had happened. The boards near the window seemed darker. The air held a pressure that gathered around my throat whenever I entered. I sat in Laura's chair until morning. Nothing came. Why should it? Its work was done. Days lost their shape. People spoke to me. I answered or did not. Food was placed before me. Letters arrived. I opened none. I walked often to the church and stood outside the gate, unable to enter, staring at the side chapel wall. Sometimes I thought I saw pale movement behind the narrow window. Sometimes I heard, beneath the ordinary sounds of village life, the faint scrape of weight on stone. Mrs. Dorman continued to come, though I did not ask her. She cooked meals I did not eat. She opened curtains I later closed. She spoke little. Once, while dusting the mantel, she found one of Laura's ribbons tucked behind a vase. She held it a moment, then put it into my hand. "She wanted you safe too," she said. I could not answer. A week after the burial, Kelly came at dusk. He found me in the garden, staring at the church. "You must leave," he said. "I cannot. You must. She is here." "No," he said gently. "She is not." I turned on him. "Do not give me your doctor's kindness. You saw her. You saw the finger." He flinched. "Yes," he said. "And because I saw it, I tell you to leave. Will you help me break them?" His face hardened. "Do not speak madness." "Madness? Are we still pretending? They killed her." "I know." The words hung between us. It was the first time he had said it plainly. "Then help me." "And what would you do?" "Smash consecrated tombs. Drag effigies into the yard. Burn marble. If I could, and if they rise before you are done, I would be glad." He looked at me with pity, which I hated. "No, Jack, you would be afraid. Any sane man would be. Leave this place. Grieve elsewhere. Did they kill before?" Kelly looked toward the church. "I have asked questions," he said, quietly. "And there are stories. Tell me." He did not want to, but he did. There had been a girl in his father's time, found dead near the churchyard wall after going to meet a lover on All Saints' Eve. Her neck was broken. They said she slipped. There had been an old sexton who swore he heard armor in the aisle at 11, and was discovered in the morning with his hair gone white and his mouth full of chalky dust. There had been animals found crushed in the lane. A dog once, with its ribs flattened as if under a millstone. A sheep with its skull pressed into the mud. And farther back, older than clear record, wives and servant girls and strangers who vanished near the end of October, while the village shut its doors and made signs on wood and glass. "The tale changes," Kelly said, "but the fear does not. And no one has destroyed them. No one who wished to live." I laughed then, a dry sound. "Living is overrated." Kelly seized my shoulders. Do not make your grief into an invitation." I pushed him away. He left angry. I watched his lantern move down the lane until mist covered it. That night, I dreamed of Laura. She stood in the parlor by the window, wearing the white gown in which she died. Her hair hung wet around her face. She was not bloody. She was not broken. She looked as she had looked on quiet mornings, except for the marks on her throat, which were dark as pressed violets. She raised one hand to the glass and looked past me, not at me. "Do not open," she whispered. I woke with my hand on the latch. The door was trembling under my fingers. Outside, something breathed. Not human breath. No warmth fogged the crack beneath the door. It was a dry, hollow movement of air, like wind passing through a tomb. I stood frozen, my hand still on the latch. Then, from the other side, something touched the wood. Tap, 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 low down near the lock. I backed away. The tapping stopped. A voice spoke. Jack. It was Laura's voice. No, not Laura's voice. A thing wearing the memory of her voice, like stolen lace. Jack, let me in. I covered my mouth to keep from answering. Jack, I am cold. My knees weakened. The room swayed. Every instinct in me wanted to open the door, to gather her in, to undo death by one obedient movement. Then I remembered the dream. Do not open. The latch lifted. It lifted by itself, slowly. I had not bolted the door. I threw myself against it just as the latch rose free. Something on the other side pressed inward. The force of it drove pain through my shoulder. Wood groaned. The lower panel cracked. I smelled wet stone, church dust, and the faint sweetness of decayed flowers. Jack, the voice whispered again, but now it was lower, thickened, full of grit. I fumbled upward and made the sign Mrs. Dorman had begged me to make. Once, twice, at the third motion, the pressure ceased. A sound came from outside. Not anger, not disappointment. A grinding retreat, heavy and patient. It moved away from the door, across the path, through the gate. I remained braced against the wood until dawn bled gray into the windows. In daylight, I saw the mark on the cracked panel, a white handprint, and beneath it, scratched into the wood with a stone fingertip, one word. Laura. I left Brenzett that afternoon. You may judge me a coward. I will not dispute it. Courage had served me poorly when it was only pride in disguise. Fear, at least, had learned something. I went to London first. The noise nearly drove me mad. Wheels on stone became armor in the aisle. A mason's chisel became the chip of marble fingers. Milk carts before dawn became slabs shifting in the dark. I saw Laura everywhere and nowhere. Women with pale hair turned corners ahead of me. A white glove in a crowd made me stop breathing. At night, I woke certain that the room had filled with church mist. I gave up painting. My hands shook too much. Years passed, though I did not live them so much as endure their passing. Mrs. Dorman wrote once. She said the cottage had stood empty. No one would rent it. The garden had gone wild. The church remained as it was. Dr. Kelly had taken ill one winter and recovered badly. He would not pass the side chapel. Children were still warned indoors before dark when October thinned toward its last night. She ended with a prayer for Laura, and perhaps for me. I kept the letter until the paper wore at the folds. One autumn, long after I returned. I do not know why. Perhaps guilt has its own tide. Perhaps some part of me believed that if I could stand again where it happened, the memory would become fixed in one place and stop following me everywhere. Perhaps I wished to die. Brenzett had changed little. Villages alter slowly, and some not at all. The same low houses leaned into the same lanes. The same damp smell rose from the fields. The church tower waited above the trees. The cottage was worse than I expected. Its roof had sagged. Ivy had climbed over one wall and forced green fingers under the eaves. The garden gate lay in the weeds. Nettles crowded the path. One window was broken, the glass jagged in the frame like teeth. The door still bore a patch where the cracked panel had been repaired. I wondered who had done it. Not me. Never me. Inside, dust lay thick. Birds had nested in the chimney. The parlor was almost empty. Yet I knew where everything had been. Laura's chair by the fire, the little table, the curtains, the place by the window where she had fallen. I stood there until the light faded. Then I heard a woman singing. Softly, from the kitchen, my heart stopped. It was a song Laura used to hum while setting flowers in water. A small tune, nothing grand, broken often because she never remembered all of it. I had not heard it in years, except in dreams. I went to the kitchen doorway. A woman stood with her back to me. She wore a white gown. Her hair fell loose. She was arranging something on the table with slow, careful hands. "Laura," I whispered. She turned. The face was not hers. It was marble, not carved smoothly like the knight's, but formed in some hideous imitation of life. The cheeks were pale stone veined with gray. The eyes were hollows filled with darkness. The mouth opened, and inside it was not tongue and teeth, but packed white dust. Yet around its throat were the bruises Laura had borne, stained into the marble as if cruelty could fossilize itself. It lifted one hand. In its palm lay a human heart, gray with age, shrunken, dry as a dead apple. Mine beat against my ribs in answer. The thing smiled with Laura's broken mouth. Then the church clock struck 11. I ran from the cottage. The world outside had changed. Dusk had become night. Mist boiled across the garden. The lane was gone, swallowed in white. From the church came the sound I had carried inside me for years. Stone sliding from stone. One stroke. I stumbled through nettles. 2. The church door groaned. 3. Something heavy struck the earth. 4. Another weight followed. 5. I reached the gate and found it upright, whole locked. 6. The keyhole was packed with marble dust. 7. Behind me, from the cottage doorway, Laura's stolen voice whispered, "Jack." 8. From the lane came the scrape of the first step. 9. Then the second. 10. I climbed the gate. Wood splintered under me. My coat tore. I fell on the far side and crawled into the lane. 11. The mist opened. They stood between me and the village. The marble knights, not as I had imagined them. Worse, far worse. They were not clean statues come prettily to life. They were ancient, cracked, fouled with grave damp and clotted lichen. Their armor plates ground against one another, showering white grit. The bearded one had a black smear across his mouth, like old blood soaked into stone. The clean-shaven one, Laura's murderer, bore the faint scar around his smallest finger. His head turned toward me with a sound like a millstone. No eyes, only hollows. Yet he saw me. The two of them advanced. Slowly. That was the horror of it. Not a rush, not a beast's leap, a patient certainty. They had all the night. They had all the years. They had waited centuries upon slabs. What was one more minute? I backed away. My foot struck a root. I fell. The bearded knight raised one marble boot. Beneath its sole, the lane mud squeezed outward. I thought of the crushed dog, the sheep with its skull flattened, the dead girl by the wall. I rolled aside as the foot came down. The earth shook. Pain burst along my hip. The clean-shaven knight reached for me. His hand closed on my coat and tore through cloth as though it were paper. I smelled him then. Stone should have no smell, but he did. Damp crypts, old rain, dust from broken teeth, and underneath it something rotten. Something that had once been human wickedness and had not decayed but fermented. His fingers grazed my neck. They were so cold that the touch burned. I screamed Laura's name. The thing in the cottage screamed back in her voice, laughing. I do not know how I escaped. Perhaps terror made me animal. Perhaps Laura, the real Laura, not the stone mimic at the cottage, heard me somewhere. My hand found a loose rock in the lane. I struck the knight's wrist. The impact shattered pain up my arm, but a chip flew from his gauntlet. He released me. The bearded knight turned, slow but unavoidable. I crawled between them. Something seized my ankle. Marble fingers closed. I felt bone bend. I kicked with my other foot, mad with pain, and struck the scarred finger of the clean-shaven knight. The finger snapped again. This time, the sound was not stone breaking. It was a man screaming. A shriek tore from the hollow armor, vast and furious, and the knight answered. The church bell clanged, though no hand rang it. Birds erupted from the yews. The mist spun. The bearded knight faltered. In the cottage, Laura's stolen voice became a dry howl. I dragged myself free and ran, or limped, or fell forward repeatedly until the village lights appeared. I hammered on the first door I reached. When they opened, I collapsed across the threshold. In my hand was the broken marble finger. Again, they found me raving. They found the finger. They found, on my throat, 4 pale burns where stone had touched flesh. But when men went to the church at dawn, the knights lay in place. The clean-shaven one was whole. Of course he was whole. They always become whole. The finger vanished from the locked drawer where the constable put it. It left behind only white dust and a smell of rain on tombs. After that, I was taken away from Brenzett, and this time I never returned. But I am old now, and old age is a country full of ghosts. The past walks there freely. It enters without knocking. It sits beside the bed. It breathes in the curtains. Every year, as October nears its end, my room grows colder. I wake to find pale grit on the floorboards. The sign of the cross appears sometimes in dust on the window, though I do not make it. Once, upon my blanket, I found a strand of Laura's hair, still gold brown, still soft, impossible after all these years. I keep it in a locket, though I fear one night it will turn to marble. Last night, I dreamed of the church again, not as it was, but as it will be when all of us are gone. Roof fallen, yews grown wild, graves sunk into the earth, the side chapel open to the sky, rain falling on 2 empty slabs. In the dream, I stood in the cottage parlor. The fire was low. Laura sat in her chair, not dead, not stone, but as she had been in our first happy days. She smiled at me. For one moment, I forgot everything. I moved toward her. Then she lifted her hand and pressed one finger to her lips. Listen, her eyes said. From outside came the scrape. The old scrape, stone over stone. The clock began to strike. I woke before 11. It is nearly that hour now. I have locked my door. I have marked the threshold. I have made the sign on every window, though my hand shook so badly the lines are crooked. I have set candles by my bed, and this paper lies before me. Perhaps you are hearing these words because someone found them after. Perhaps I survived another year. Perhaps survival is only a slower form of haunting. The room is very cold. There is dust under the door. The clock downstairs has begun to strike. 1. If you are listening in darkness, do not laugh at old stories. 2. Do not mock the warnings of those who fear what you have not yet seen. 3. Do not leave the one you love alone, because pride tells you fear is foolish. 4. There are things in this world that wait for disbelief. 5. There are houses that remember. 6. There are churches where the dead do not sleep. 7. There are hands that remain folded in prayer, only while the sun is up. 8. The dust is moving. 9. Someone is at the door. 10. Laura is calling my name. 11. Thank you for listening. If this story found you in the dark, keep one light burning a little longer tonight. And should you ever pass through Brenzett on All Saints' Eve, and should some old woman tell you to lock your door, mark your windows, and stay inside before the church clock strikes 11, do not smile. Do not argue. Do not ask to see the marble nights. Believe her, and whatever voice calls from the other side of the door, no matter how beloved, no matter how lost, no matter how sweetly it begs to be let in, do not open. Good night.
Whispers of a love so true, painting dreams of me and you. And I'll hold you close in this moment so divine. Whispers of